Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Carrie Ann, and today we're going to be talking about my current obsession, historical romances. The last 7 books that I've read have all been historical romances, so I am really excited to share with you 8 reasons why I think you should be reading historical romances in no particular order. Number 8 is dramatic irony. Historical romances typically take place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, so that's almost 150 years ago, which means that we obviously know everything that's happened since then. So a lot of the current events or things that the characters hypothesize might happen in the future, we know will come true. For example, in a book I was reading recently, they were commenting that pretty soon women were going to be riding bicycles, which sounds ridiculous to us now because obviously women ride bicycles. I've ridden a bicycle, and almost every single day on the streets of New York City, I almost get run over by a woman on a city bike. So confirmed, that does come true. But it's funny to hear the characters debating and discussing things that they think might happen, or, progressive movements that to us seem, so silly, even backwards now, but are, futuristic to them. I think it adds a kind of funny, ironic element to all of these stories that makes them even more enjoyable than, say, a contemporary romance at times. Number 7 is something that's a bit personal for me, but I think a lot of people really will resonate with this as well. And it's the love of history and being able to read stories and learn about the politics and movements that were going on at the time. So I was a history major in school, so I definitely love reading about history. But even if you don't, or you think you might not, it definitely does add another layer to the story and another interesting element that kind of sets the backdrop to everything else that's going on. A lot of historical romances do involve political movements, which kind of goes hand in hand with number 6, which is the early roots of feminism that's rooted in a lot of historical romances. I think because authors who are writing women in these really oppressed situations maybe feel the need to put the women in a position where they're helping with the feminist movement, but a lot of historical romances I've read have had women, main characters, who are really involved with origins of feminism, or they're very modern women. And I think it's really cool to kind of see the origins of that movement that's obviously paved such an important path for us in the future. On a less serious note, number 5 is the abundant consumption of lemonade. I don't know if soda just wasn't invented then, or people didn't like juice, but for some reason it seems like in every scene the women are drinking lemonade. I know that high society women didn't drink alcohol that much, or weren't supposed to, maybe in the company of men, but there is just so much lemonade that these people are drinking. Like, Minute Maid would have a field day with these people. I just simply cannot imagine consuming that much lemonade. The sugar hangover the next day must be absolutely awful and so sour, but it really does crack me up every time. I'm like, can I fetch you a glass of lemonade? And they're always saying yes to that offer. So I think it's kind of a funny thing to pick up on when you start watching shows like Bridgerton or reading a lot of historical romances. You will be probably pretty surprised at the amount of lemonade that everyone seems to be drinking. Number 4 is the origin of the reformed rake. So this is a trope we still use in contemporary romances. I think a great example in a contemporary book of a reformed rake is Fox from Tessa Bailey's Hook, Line, and Sinker. Fox is a playboy, and his whole thing is he doesn't think that he's worthy of Hannah, the girl that he's interested in, because of his past. This is a trope that we actually see beginning in historical romances, though. I would say the majority of heroes in romance books are rakes, and they're committed to their family business, or they're not committed to their family business, and they have a mistress and they have no intention of ever marrying because of XYZ reason. And then they meet someone and their entire world goes upside down and they throw all that out the window. And I wouldn't say reformed rake is a top 5 trope for me, but it's definitely one that I enjoy. And I think it's kind of cool to see the origin of that in the historical romance genre and see how that kind of plays out in modern day now. Number 3 is the idea of being ruined. While I don't support the patriarchal ideals that support this idea, I do think it makes for a really interesting plot device. If you're not familiar, a woman was considered ruined if she was stumbled upon alone with a man in a room. So that is to say, she didn't have a chaperone. If she's unmarried, that was, the end of her career as a debutante or as someone who's looking for a husband, and it would be presumed that if the man was a gentleman, he would propose marriage. This means that historical romance authors typically use it as a plot device. So if for some reason, character A and B are off somewhere, and even if nothing is going on, they are stumbled upon, they're forced to marry. So this works really well in an enemies to lovers situation. Maybe they've been bickering and they don't like each other, but now they are both from society, which means that they have to get married. This makes for a lot of really awkward conversations and encounters later on, a ton of forced proximity, and also, of course, my favorite trope, only one bed. So I think this can be used really creatively as a plot device to force two people together when they wouldn't normally have a reason to spend that much time together. I will say though, I think this can be overused. So if I'm reading a historical romance series with 3 or 4 books and it's used in multiple, it's not my favorite, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for this to be done really well and make it really interesting, which leads into reason number 2 that you should be reading historical romances, which is the plot. The plots in some of these books are so unhinged in a way that I think you just couldn't get away with in a contemporary romance. For example, in The Viscount Who Loves Me by Julia Quinn, which is the book that season 2 of Bridgerton is based on, Anthony, his father, unfortunately passes away from a bee sting. They didn't have the technology to help him when he had an allergic reaction after being stung by a bee, and they didn't even know that it was an allergic reaction necessarily that killed him. With modern medicine, we are aware, obviously, of what's happening. So the reader knows that most people don't die from a bee sting, but to Anthony, his father, this person he's looked up to his whole life, died from a bee sting. And when he sees Kate, his sworn enemy, get stung by a bee, he genuinely loses his mind and becomes possessed and tries to suck the venom out of her. And the whole time you're sitting there as a reader thinking, what on earth is going on? You understand where Anthony is coming from, but it's the type of plot point that I feel like you just can't get away with in a contemporary romance because there's not really a context. This sort of unhinged behavior would make sense. And I think that's just one example, but a lot of historical romances can get away with pretty ridiculous scenarios because of the rules of society at the time and the lack of modern medicine, modern technology, etc. So it makes for a really fun twist to the book that separates it, I think, a bit from contemporary romances. Last, but certainly not least, is the additional element of escapism that historical romances provide. I think a lot of people, including myself, like to read books to escape everything that's going on in their everyday lives. For example, I love to read after I've spent a long day doing law school homework or studying for exams. It's nice to switch it up and not just think about property or torts, and instead read about, New York City in the Gilded Age and, high society events and all of that. Obviously, what separates historical from contemporary romances is the time period. So historical romances, to me, provide even more of an escape because you're reading about a world that's so different from our own. It's a completely different time with different rules, different procedures, different customs, and it provides an extra layer of escape. Generally speaking, I prefer not to read books where the main character is a lawyer because I'm in law school right now and it feels like it hits a bit too close to home. However, I recently read a historical romance where the hero was a lawyer, and it didn't bother me at all because obviously everything he's doing in his entire life is so different from mine and what mine will be even after I graduate. I think the change in time period really just adds another layer to the fictional fantasy that we're all indulging in when we choose to read. So I presume at this point I've convinced you that you should be reading historical romances, and I can't let you go without offering 2 really great options. Both of these are books in a series. They're my favorite books in the series, but neither of them are the first book. So if you want to start from the beginning, you definitely can, but they both can be read as standalones if that's your preference. Book number 1 is The Prince of Broadway. This is in Joanna Shupe's historical romance series. It's set in New York City during the Gilded Age, and they're all quite good, but the Prince of Broadway is my favorite. Essentially, our female main character, she goes to the male main character because she wants him to teach her how to run a gambling den. And this is all the first chapter, and he basically says to her, okay, just so you know, I'm really attracted to you and I'm trying to plot to take down your father. So as long as you're all good with that, I will teach you how to run your own casino. And I was sitting there simply jaw on the floor. Normally, you see a lot of miscommunication in books, which I don't necessarily mind. I know the miscommunication trope gets a lot of hate recently, but there's no miscommunication here. You know, this man is laying his cards on the table from chapter 1, and I was texting my friend who recommended it to me. I was like, I cannot believe the things that he is saying right now. So that, you know, if that's how chapter 1 starts, the rest of the book is going to be great. And it was. I devoured this book, and I've been reading a lot of her backlists lately, so I can confirm the rest of the books in the series and her other series are also very good. But this one is my favorite so far. The other book that I really recommend is A Rogue of One's Own. This is the second book in Evie Dunmore's A League of Extraordinary Women series, and this one is also my favorite in the series, although the rest of them are quite good. In this book, we get to see in the prologue that when they were children, as teenagers, the two main characters are thought of as enemies, but we can see that he has a soft spot for her. And then it flashes forward to modern day, and you have that background knowledge of how Lucian felt about her, and I think it really adds something to the story, because even though it's an enemies to lovers, you know that he's felt really strongly about her the whole time, which is nice. Lastly, as a bonus recommendation, I have Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't include Lisa Kleypas on this list, because she is one of the biggest romance authors of our time. Devil in Disguise, it's my bonus recommendation because I think it's best read when listened to on audio. The male main character has a Scottish accent that the audiobook narrators do a fantastic job with. It's an incredible read, it's a hilarious read, and I definitely recommend listening to it on audio if you're thinking of picking it up. Obviously, the Bridgerton series is another incredibly popular historical romance book series, and the bonus with that is you can watch it on Netflix as a TV show after you read the books. So hoping that we get a new season soon. Yeah, my thing fell off the wall.